One of the common requirements in enterprise applications is to give staff or admin access to all functionality in the application by overriding the usual authorization checks. In this video, I will show you how to implement this functionality in ASP.NET applications using the policy-based authorization framework. We will build a mechanism that will automatically grant staff or admin access to all policies and requirements by default while still enforcing this for the regular users. I will be using Amazon Cognito as the identity provider for this example. However, this will work for any of the providers that you're using for your application. Hello everyone, my name is Rahul and welcome back to this YouTube channel. If you're new here, I make videos on .NET, Cloud and DevOps. This video is part of my ASP.NET series and thanks to AWS for sponsoring it. In the previous videos, I have been exploring the policy-based framework of ASP.NET Core. If you're completely new to how the policy-based framework works, I highly recommend checking those out first. To do a quick recap, here we have an ASP.NET application where we build a new policy that has multiple requirements. This same requirements has multiple handlers where we saw you can have a paid subscription handler, educational institutional handler, and also a handler that suspends user. Now, each of these handlers caters for different conditions and policies in your application. Now, how this works is like an OR condition, which means each of these handlers will be run, and if any of them is passing the requirement, that is enough to pass this policy. Now, in this case, there are two requirements that needs to be passed, which means both these requirements should be success. Now, one of these handlers explicitly calls fail, which means in that scenario, even if any of the other handlers calls succeed, this will fail because this is explicitly suspended. Now, you can see we have the geographic access requirement also having its own handlers defined along with the requirement. Now, let's say in this scenario, you need to give your administrator or your staff access to all the functionality in your application. Now, one of the ways to do that would be to go and add in a handler for admin in all of these requirements. Now, that is going to be a tedious process and also it's not scalable. As in when you add more requirements, you need to remember to add a handler for the staff as well. This is where you can use one of the features of ASP.NET Core policy-based authorization framework where you can have a single handler cater for multiple requirements. Now, up until now, the case that we were seeing was multiple requirements and multiple handlers. However, you can also write a single handler that will handle for all your pending requirements that is still to be succeeded. We will be using this to implement the admin specific handler. Now, if we switch back to our application code, you can see all of these handlers were explicitly using the authorization handler and it specified the requirement that it was handling. So in this case, there was a one-to-one relationship between the requirement and the handler. So let's switch to our new admin handler, which I have already written out here. In this case, this is directly implementing the interface, which is authorization handler. Now, this also has a handle async method, which takes in the authorization handler context. And inside here, we can check if the user is in role of admin, which means in this case, if they belong to a user group of admin. If that is the case, we loop through all the pending requirements that's still waiting to be succeeded, and we explicitly call succeed on all of them. So if there is an admin user, they automatically get succeeded for all the requirements. Now, you need to register this inside your program.cs. So let's go back. So we can duplicate this line and simply call the admin handler inside this. This means this handler will get invoked when the policies are being evaluated. So let's run this application and see this in action. Now, I have been using the .http file to make the request, so let's switch over to that. Here we have a user, John, premium user, who has access to the API because he passes all the criteria that is required. So we are using that as the first example, and let's hit the detailed endpoint. So it hits our breakpoints. So here it first hits the geographic requirement handler. It checks on the locale and the claim is passing because it is belonging to ENIN, which is in the allowed list of claims. Once that passes, it's also hitting the subscription tier requirement. In this case, John is a premium user, which means he gets access for that. So in this case, this gets called succeeded and it passes that. However, it does fail the other two handlers because John does not belong to either education or research. He is part of the engineering team. which means this does not call succeed. However, we have already called succeeded on this requirement earlier. Now, this user is not in suspended role, which means we are not explicitly calling fail. And this finally hits our admin handler, but however, John is not in admin role, it doesn't call succeed on any of that. But since two other handlers called succeeded for John, he gets to access this API endpoint. So you can see the results are being returned in this case. Now, let's switch back to our HTTP example and let's switch this token to the admin token and let's see how this works. Now, in this case, the admin user is set up in Cognito as a user which belongs to the admin group. So in this case, you can see the locale is ENXX, which fails our geographic criteria. This user is not a premium subscription or a basic subscription. They don't have any subscription at all, but they belong to the group admin. So let's use the admin token and invoke the detailed endpoint. Now, in this case, it's hitting the geographic one. However, since the locale is in XX, it doesn't call succeed. It now hits the paid subscription handler. Since they don't have any subscription claim of that, it doesn't call the succeed on that either. Nor is the admin part of the education or research, which means that also is not getting succeeded. And it's also not on the suspended, because of which we're not explicitly calling the fail. So now it hits the admin handler. And here you can see this is an admin group. So it looks at the pending requirements, which is two requirements. So both subscription tier requirement and geographic access requirement is pending to be processed. So in each of these, we are calling succeed for that requirement, which means they get access to this specific endpoint because those are the two requirements that is required. So now if we switch back to services, you can see the data is coming back for this specific user. So for this example, I've used the role and the groups to get a mechanism of the admin user, but this might change based on your application needs. However, you can use this same mechanism to get them access to all endpoints. If you are enjoying this video so far, please make sure to hit the like button. It helps me to spread the word and also grow this YouTube channel. Now, one of the things to note here is that we have a case where we explicitly fail a user. This is the suspended user handler. Now, in this case, this is getting suspended if the user belongs to the group suspended. So if I switch back and put admin in also in the suspended group, so let's say we can add the suspended group and assign this group for this user, which means this user is now part of two groups, admin and suspended, for whatever reason that might be. We'll have to generate a new token to use this new groups inside. Let's navigate to our app client, go to the login page, and let's log in this user again. So its admin is already logged in. So let's navigate to that. Let's grab this code and exchange this for a token. So we have the new token with the group updated. So let's switch back to HTTP and let's change this admin token to the new token. Let's hit this endpoint again. Now, in this case, this is not passing the locale claim. This is not passing that. However, in this specific case, the user is in suspended role, which means we are going to call fail on that. Now, in this specific case as well, this hits the handler async for admin. This is looking at the pending requirements and it sees that there is still two requirements to be succeeded. So this calls succeed on both. However, in this case, since we've explicitly called fail on one of the requirements, this returns a 403 forbidden. So in scenarios where you're explicitly calling fail on requirements, and if you need to check for admin in those scenarios, you will have to explicitly check for those cases. In here, you can say this is suspended and it is not admin, for example. However, there might be a reason that you went and put admin in suspended in the first place. So this might be actually what you want in your application as well. This all comes down to how you have your policies and what properties you're checking and how it is being checked. However, the general rule is to try and avoid using context.fail explicitly and use it only in exceptional cases. Majority of the cases, you should be able to handle different handlers and use that to handle the mechanism. So you just call succeed if the requirement succeeds. If not, you let some other handler process it. And if none of the handlers processes it, it all automatically fails. However, there are certain scenarios that we will need to call fail. In those scenarios, just make sure to explicitly handle for the admin or staff. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Hit that subscribe button if you want to be notified of future such videos. It also helps me to grow this YouTube channel. Thank you and see you soon in the next video.